Welcome to the INSOL Europe COVID-19 coffee break. This time we will discuss the implications of the COVID-19 virus and the outbreak in Finland and in Sweden. My name is Jan Lilius. I work at the law firm Hannes Snellman in Finland, Helsinki. I work as an advisor for different stakeholders, for instance, for debtors and for creditors in various situations. I also work and act as an administrator, both in formal restructuring proceedings as well as in bankruptcy proceedings. Currently, I am also a council member of INSOL Europe and a country coordinator for Finland. And I have a pleasure today to discuss together with Mr. Niklas Körling. Please go ahead, Niklas, and tell me something about yourself.
Yes, nice to be here, Jan, and have this discussion. Yes, my name is Niklas Körling from Sweden. I'm a partner in the Stockholm office of Wistrand. We also have a Gothenburg office. As you, Jan, I'm also an advisor and an insolvency practitioner, so I work on both sides, you can say, creditor and debtor side. And here we can also be appointed both for reorganizations and bankruptcies for formal procedures. I myself is a previous council member, so I was that for full 2 terms, and also a country coordinator for Sweden. Yeah, so that's about me.
All right. So when did you stop being a country coordinator for Sweden?
A council member. That was about that was about 3 years ago. So I had been for was it 3 years and then 3 years, and then there's a colleague at another law firm being that until last year.
Yeah, right. So let's move into the topic a little bit. Tell me about your daily life in Sweden, Niklas, for the last few months. How has that been? Have you been working from home or from the office?
Yes, to start with, it has been a different time, also here in Sweden. So we had since March, most of the people have been working at home, and if possible, also at Wistrand. That has what we have done. For myself, I can take the bike into work, and also as we have our own offices and rather large space, I have myself been working mostly at the office, to be honest. But most meetings have been with Teams, Zoom and Skype. There has been almost no physical meetings, and there has been no lunches or other social functions. So it has been a different time. How has it been in Finland?
Well, actually, we have a very strong recommendation to work, to have distance working. So I have actually worked a lot from my home and also from our summer house, and I have only been just a few times to the office, and I must say that I'm starting to really miss my colleagues at the firm. It would be really nice to meet them in person as well, because I think that just having these video conferences, even if that's a very efficient and nice way to conduct business, so to say, it doesn't completely. I mean, it's all very important also that you meet persons physically.
Yeah.
So, but about the lockdown in Sweden, I think we don't need to really go into the lockdown, how it has been during the last months. I understand on a general level that in Sweden the regulations have not been that strict as they have been in Finland. However, I also understand that you are gradually moving towards loosening the restrictions. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. We are now removing our lockdowns. And for example, now it's possible to travel within Sweden. Before we had a restriction on 2 hours travels within Sweden. But we still have the restriction that if possible, you should work at home. We have the possibility, we still have no relief for amusement parks, and the 50% restriction remains. So far, mostly the ban on travels have been lifted. How is it in Finland?
We are moving gradually towards lifting the different recommendations and regulations regarding the lockdown. I hope that, let's say, in October, we would, for instance, be free to have like sporting events and even indoors. Now it's possible, subject to certain preconditions, to do that also in terms of outdoor sporting events in Finland. But I hope that because I'm a great ice hockey enthusiast, I hope that it will be possible to see my favorite team, HIFK, from October onwards. But now gradually we are from June onwards, we have been lifting the restrictions, for instance, regarding elderly persons. And now it's possible also to open restaurants, to open bars, to open cafes, and that sort of thing. So we are gradually heading towards, so to say, ordinary life. But the traveling, as you asked, the traveling restrictions in Finland for the time being, actually in June, mid-June, there was a regulation according to which traveling to Baltic and Nordic countries is possible. However, unfortunately, regarding Sweden, there is a quarantine put into effect. If you travel to Sweden, you need to be a few weeks at home after that.
Okay. Yeah, and we have also lifted some of the restrictions for travels outside of Sweden from the 30th of June, that's today, to some countries. Unfortunately, not to the Nordic countries. That will be lifted the 15th of July.
Okay. Well, of course, every one of us, we sincerely hope that the life would get back to normal as quickly as possible. I think the problem is that if you loosen the recommendations too much, there is a risk that the COVID-19 virus again starts to spread. So that's, of course, the real problem here. But how about the insolvency reforms in Sweden? What has been, or has there been anything done in that respect?
The short answer could be no, because there has been, but I will elaborate that a bit. As there has been no direct changes regarding insolvency law as such. But there has been other changes which affect insolvencies and also try to mitigate the risk of insolvency. The most important is that there is legislation that allows the Swedish tax agency to have grant deferrals for tax payments. And that's especially important in Sweden as we have a personal liability also in limited liability companies for the directors for tax payments. So tax payments are normally something that will drive a company into insolvency if not possible to pay. So now we have tax deferrals. It's also possible to receive government financing. We have a company called Almi, and that company now also has a possibility to finance administration proceedings, reorganization proceedings. So that's good. And there has been more reorganization proceedings during this time period. Other subsidies are the short-time working allowance, and that allow employers who reduce their working hours to get paid partly from the state. So you can get the state support. And then we also have rent discount subsidies, and that's also if landlords reduce their rent payments, they can get some part of that paid from the state. So you could say that the landlords and the state, they divide and they have parts of the reduced rent payments for that. And I think that's the most major changes we have, but none of them are directly to the insolvency legislation. How is it in Finland?
Well, actually, we have a few reforms made due to the COVID-19 virus. And one of them is in the Bankruptcy Act and another one in the so-called Enforcement Code. And I think which is maybe a little bit more of interest is the one concerning the Bankruptcy Act, because for instance, institutional creditors, it's very common to first send the payment demand to the debtor with 1 week's payment time, with the threat of otherwise filing for insolvency or for bankruptcy. And that right of the creditors have been taken away, i.e., because you need to show that the company is insolvent, and according to law, just sending that payment demand with 1 week's payment time, and because of the non-payment, the insolvency of the debtor company would be assumed. But at this point, until the end of October 2020, that is not the case, i.e. the creditor needs to show the insolvency of the debtor in other ways. So that's a big difference.
Yeah, we have about the same rule in Sweden, but that has remained. Yeah.
Okay, so that's still in effect in Sweden.
Yeah, but we also have a countermeasure that you can also demand damages if you do such an application wrongly. So there's a risk. Yeah.
Interesting. Yes. And then there are certain amendments made to the enforcement code, which actually mean that the enforcement proceedings can be postponed due to the due to reasons attributable to financial distress related to COVID-19. So in principle, that it's possible for the debtor to just show for the bailiff that the problems are related to COVID-19, and then the bailiff should in principle not continue the actual enforcement proceedings. And that is also in force until the end of October 2020. And then there's another recommendations regarding the so-called restructuring proceedings. This is purely a recommendation, but it's followed in practice by all administrators. And the recommendation means that if the company would not be able to pay new debts which have arisen after the debtor company has filed for the formal restructuring proceedings, that is not the reason for the discontinuation of the restructuring proceedings. That, i.e., that if you can, there is it's very much at the discretion of the restructuring administrator to decide whether he wants to interrupt the proceedings or not. And I think in practice, because of these very exceptional circumstances, they will not do it, but wait until autumn and see how it goes then.
So a bit more flexibility.
More flexibility, exactly. Yeah. How about the courts in Sweden? How has the courts functioned during this crisis?
Yes, the courts, they have still been opened. But they have tried to reduce the physical hearings and court meeting as far as possible. Okay. So they have used telephones and the internet and such. But I know that there is a backlog of criminal cases when the accused is not arrested. also that it's hard to get the people to the court. It's easy to say that you maybe have a sickness or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And for arbitration proceedings, I know that they have been somewhat delayed and tried to move to digital meetings, but there are some problems and issues with that.
Yeah.
How is it in Finland? Is it about the same?
It's, I would say, very much the same. There are some regional differences in Finland, and I know, however, that there is a backlog of cases. I think that backlog is not only civil matters, not only criminal matters, as it seems to be in Sweden, if I understood you correctly, but also with regard to civil matters. So but this is something the courts are working on for the time being, and they are trying to catch up the delay. So there is clear indication that after this holiday season period, they are doing their best to try to speed up the process, and hopefully that they can catch up the delay as much as possible very shortly.
Sounds good.
Yeah, Niklas. Of course, one very interesting point and issue is that are there more actual cases in Sweden at this point?
There has been a slight increase of work, I would say. In the beginning, in March, there was a lot of calls and you had to discuss what can you do and so on. So then it was more talk and not work. But then maybe in April and May, there has been a slight increase in work. Although I understand that there are regional differences, maybe a bit more here in Stockholm than out in the other parts of the country.
Right.
And I would say it is especially reorganization that have increased, because the companies see that this is for a short time period, and we try to go into reorganization, get some state wage guarantee and other supports, and then hopefully
maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And how is it in Finland? Has it been any change in the numbers?
Yeah, it's quite close to Sweden. I mean, of course, I noticed that in the beginning of this crisis that there were a lot of advisory work, many kinds of advisory work. However, I think that the measures from the Finnish government has led to a situation where there are actually not that many new formal insolvency proceedings, and it will be interesting to see if that will, increase that work in autumn and close to the year end. That's something. There have been a few large-scale proceedings in Finland. Both of them are formal restructurings and have started in spring this year. One of them is related to Stockmann, which is a famous Finnish listed company engaged in the retail trade, and then another one is related to Touhula, which is a private daycare service provider. So these two companies have made some headlines in the news because they filed for restructuring. But otherwise, it's been quite, let's say, normal.
Okay, yes. How do you see about the future in Finland?
Yeah, just like I mentioned, I think that's very interesting to see. I think there will be more work, but how much, nobody knows. It's really difficult to predict at this stage. How is that in Sweden?
I think that many see a risk when these tax deferrals will be lifted, maybe at the year end or beginning next year, and also the other subsidies. So most of them here in Sweden are like a loan, so you have to pay it back.
Yeah.
And that
you usually need to pay them back.
Exactly. So, but I know already that there are talks that couldn't this be support instead of loans, and how do you phase out of this? So I think it will be interesting in the end. But hopefully, I think that, and I believe that we have enough Swedish legal professionals in this area, and I think that although we have a bit old maybe legislation in practice, it works quite well. So I think we will be able to deal with it as it happens in Finland.
Yeah, I agree. I think actually I agree to everything you said. I think we have enough of professionals. I think that the legal framework in Finland actually in principle is good and good enough. There may be some areas that need some brushing, so to say, and I know that there is a working group which has been established because of the preventive restructuring directive, and I think that in this context the restructuring act will also be reviewed, and let's see what that leads into.
Interesting to hear, because it's the same in Sweden. We also have there will be a proposal of this new law, or if it will be incorporated in the reorganization law, and we also will have some change, I believe, in the reorganization law. So that will be interesting, maybe in the beginning of 2021.
Yeah, that's really interesting. All right, I think we need to conclude our discussion. It's been really nice to talk to you, Niklas. I saved the best for the last, so to say. It's been a little bit of a topical and sensitive, even maybe slightly political issue that Finns are applying a so-called quarantine to Finnish nationals who want to travel to Sweden, and if they get back, they need to be in quarantine. How has this been addressed or received in Sweden?
Yeah, I believe that this has been somewhat problematic for the Swedish politicians, especially as Sweden has chosen a bit of another route, managing the COVID-19, as we have a bit lighter restrictions, and we also have had restrictions for Swedes traveling out, but all the time during this time we have let everyone within the EU into Sweden. The borders have been open, but the response to that is that I can notice that Sweden has opened, so we can go outside of Sweden now today, but not to Norway, Denmark, and Finland. So I guess that's some kind of response, although I think it could be a bit strange, as I understand from the numbers that it should be it's no problem traveling to your countries as it is not to France or Germany. So I believe that could be the response to your question, that the politicians see something that they can do.
Yeah. Let's just hope. I think it's fair to conclude that let's just hope that everything gets back to normal as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it will be very nice when we can have a physical meeting again and see each other for lunch in Stockholm or Helsinki.
Yeah, let's do that. All right. Thank you very much for listening to us, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.